Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever around the world it is that you found us here today. Welcome to another of the Icarus Signals Indicator Outline and Tutorial Guides. Today we are going to be looking at the Icarus Signals Bolli-Band Change Display Indicator. Now, we've currently got the Icarus Signals news site loaded up here, which I assume many of you have been having the opportunity to have a bit of a look at. If not, obviously just jump on there at icarussignals.com and you can use that resource totally free of charge. It's a daily news aggregation site. We've got the economic calendar up here, which is, again, one of the fantastic new widgets or feeds through from the MQL5, or in fact, I think this one might be the investing.com widget. So take your time there to have a bit of a peruse through that and see how some of your strategies might apply to some of the news feeds. But more importantly, let's, without further ado, get on to the, in this case, we've got the Think Forex demo account, which is what we typically use to record all of our indicator outline videos. We'll just scroll quickly through from the start. If you're watching the videos in sequential order, we've got the first here, which was originally the pound 1 hour, so GBP USD 1 hour. This is the reversals free indicator. This is something that everyone can download free, either from the Icarus Signals website or the MQL5 community. We've got a number of features there. We'd encourage you to go and have a look at at that video itself to see how that particular indicator works and some of the different features that might work for you with your trading strategies. Next is the full unlocked Icarus reversals indicator in full. It's fully optimizable, fully customizable, which again we'd encourage you to go and have a look at that one in a bit more detail. We've got the auto support and resistance indicator. Very, very simple. We haven't dropped anything else onto that particular video. But in this case, again, we've got the Euro 1 hour there, which is showing it to be very, very effective in self-generating different support and resistance levels. And then we move on to the primary topic of today's video. This is the Icarus Signals Bolli-Band Change Display Indicator. Now, for those of you that have watched the continuation strategy, or continuation indicator video, which was posted sometime shortly before this, you will notice that these little markers here, these little down short arrow indicators or signals, are awfully similar to those of the continuation indicator, which was outlined in one of the previous videos. That's because I've got both of these indicators loaded onto this particular chart, which we'll get to the reason for that in a moment. But the primary reason, as the name of the video and the outline suggests, is in fact the overlay. What we like to use is a filter, which you can see in the background here. You can see this shaded area, which as we zoom out a little bit will become a little bit more self-evident. We'll zoom it right out so we can actually see what this particular indicator is doing. Now, everyone or most traders around the world are aware of the Bollinger Bands, the traditional indicator that was developed by Mr. Bollinger many, many, many years ago, which has been a feature of many trading strategies and many of the tools or the suite of tools that traders use to help to identify areas of trend formation or the cessation of a particular trend. Now, one thing that we found as we were building a number of systems over the years is that when we overlay things like the continuation indicator or indeed the reversals indicator into different market environments, different time zones, different instrument types, we find that the Bollinger Bands as they stand did a good job in some cases, although they are a look-back type indicator, so they're lagging in that regard, they do provide us with a good opportunity to be able to filter out a little bit of the backwards and forth, sort of the up and down noise that we see all too common, particularly in the currency pairs. And even more so as many more seasoned traders and investors will realise the shorter time frame and more actively traded currency pairs. Now, the primary benefit or the primary tool of the Icarus Signals Bolli-Band Change Display is designed to give us a very clear indication where price is expanding or the bands are expanding away from the control line, or where they are contracting. All too often we found that when you had the Bollinger Bands on the chart, which we can, for the sake of the purpose, drop those on there now. And I'll just try and find the standard MT4 Bollinger Bands. And we'll drop those on to get a little bit of a guide. But if we say here, for example, 180, and just put the standard indicator on there, we'll see that indeed, as we zoom in, it'll follow this particular line. So we can see here that the indicator itself is just marked by this green line here and this green line here. Now, for the sake of the exercise to more clearly delineate those, what we'll do is we'll change the Icarus Bolli-Band Change Display just slightly so we can see the differential between them two. And it'll give us at the same time the opportunity to see some of the different inputs and some of the different features of that before we start going into some of the integration that we've built in with the BolliBand Change Display, some of our automated strategies, and indeed the indicators that help to create those. So we'll just open up this one here as we go. You can see here these are all customizable fields. For the sake of the exercise, we'll just very quickly adjust the thickness of this shading. We wouldn't recommend it, but again, of course, all of the Icarus signals indicators are fully customizable for your particular preference. Our template is this white background with the blue and the red candles, but again, of course, you can build those as you see fit. You'll see that as we do that, it really thickens up. But again, it does have the habit of, with this particular template, making the chart a little bit hard to see. But again, many different colour combinations might be able to suit what it is that you want to do. So we'll go back and we'll change that back to its default settings. Anyone downloading the free trial or utilising this as a purchased or leased copy will be able to adjust and change all of this as you see fit. You'll notice here that we've got 180 as a matched value, but to just be able to move the Bollinger Bands away from the BolliBand Change Display indicator, we'll just change the width to 1.2. That'll shrink down our Icarus signals indicator and show us just the difference with the standard Bollinger Band. So we can see here the green Bollinger Band line, which will populate itself onto the chart using standard MT4 templates and almost every other trading platform, including NT8, which this indicator, in fact, the full suite of Icarus signals indicators is available for. It's an IndiTrade 8 program. If you'd like to better trade other equities or different instruments that MT4, your broker on MT4 doesn't support. So the reason for the BolliBand Change Display and why we find this is a much more user-friendly version of the Bollinger Band type arrangement is it gives us a much clearer visual indication of when the bands are expanding away from each other. We can see here quite clearly that these bands, as they start to move forward in time, begin to extend the space between each of them. So in this case, just we'll use the measuring tool, bring it down to say 207, move out a little bit further in time, measure the same thing, and we're at 269. So therefore, this particular space is indeed increasing, although it's a little bit hard to try and find just by eyeballing the standard Bollinger Bands where they actually begin to compress, which would be usually suggestive of a change in direction or a marked slowdown in the continuation of a particular trend. We'll notice here this is actually a fairly good example. We'll just draw a line here that we can see marks the trend all the way up. And then we'll see at around about this point here, well, in fact, this point here exactly, the Bollinger Band Change Display moves from expanding, which is marked as blue, to contracting, which is marked as orange. Now, again, this is calculated using Bollinger Band type inputs, and we then go and then measure the rate of change or the expansion and contraction rates, which gives us the opportunity to fully customize where these change or the sensitivity of the bands to price. So what we'll do is we'll clean this up a little bit. We'll move out the trend line which we used to draw on there. We will delete the Bollinger Band itself. I might just go about doing it this way. And we'll delete those out. While we're here as well, we will edit it back to where it was earlier and just use the standard two standard deviations of the Bolli width. That's the That's the width of the amount of standard deviations from the center control line that we can see here, and that will reset us. We'll notice in this particular instance, as we've had a fairly decent on the 1 hour trend strongly upwards, is that as the Bollinger Band reverts to a contracting phase between here, and indeed further along here, we find that this longer and stronger upwards trend begins to fade away, and we start to get a lot more chop and sideways movement. As we scroll across here, we'll see again that becomes again particularly evident. The long, strong upwards trend of the Bollinger Band breaks down. We see here a lot of resistance at this particular point, and we find a backwards and forwards action through this Bollinger Band Change Display period before we see any further move in an upwards direction. Again, we've got our continuation indicators here, which help us identify areas of very strong trend. Again, that will appear in this particular instance only when the bands are expanding. For the sake of the exercise, what we'll do is we will move out to a one-day time frame. And again, we can see the extreme price moves that have happened after the, we might call it the COVID shock here between February and March, have then seen the US dollar index, or DXY, which will be common across a number of different currencies, but in this case we're looking at the euro, and seeing the euro go from sort of just sub 108 all the way north to 120 almost, and that's in the space of from May to where we are now in September. So a very, very significant move. And the bands have expanded from almost precisely the point where we started to see a little bit of consolidation and then a move through the control line with the continuation signals, and then it just rocketed higher all the way through. It's starting to come off a little bit now. So I think that we'll find in time that these Bollinger Bands will be getting very close to beginning to mark a contraction. That'll bring us to something else to look at when we look at the thresholds that we've got. Now we're going to look back to a period of 10, and this is for expansion, and we can look back for a period of 10 for contraction. What we'll do is we'll change these percentages just to give us a little bit of an idea. When we want to see the amount at which it is expanding beyond its previous value, and we might say, for example, 5. We're going to say 5% expansion and then 5% and then 0% contraction, and that'll give us a little bit of an idea. It'll help us identify zones that contract more quickly, and it's going to give a little bit more leeway for the expansion. And we'll see what that does to this daily Icarus Signals Bolli-Band Change Display. So we'll set that there. And you can see again, when we include the percentage values, it will help us to identify areas where the Bollinger Band is not expanding or contracting by enough for it to be regarded in any particular category. That'll help us then build systems and strategies that identify different trading conditions where the application of different indicators or overlays, whether it be the reversals indicator, the continuation indicator, or the Icarus oscillator, which is in some later videos, gives the opportunity to identify entries and exits based on overall market conditions. So we'll leave that as that is now, and we'll scroll back in time a little bit just to see how that particular setting helps us to identify different trading conditions. And the other element which I mentioned earlier in the introduction to the video, as we zoom out a little bit and we start to identify more areas such as this here in 2014, where we saw an expansion period in the BolliBand's Change Display, saw a very rapid move down again with the appearance in these particular settings of the continuation indicators appearing not only inside, not only outside of the settings of the Bollinger Bands and indeed the Bolli Change Display bands, but also outside of those with a continuous string of continuation signals all the way through, with a few little areas that started to slow down in the downtrend, which produces these empty or no direction areas. And so again, you can see how those, and it won't populate too much further apart because we haven't got enough data in there, so it'll start to look a little bit strange. So we'll scroll back out and we will refresh this so it starts to cooperate. Get it back to the other end. And And we'll just OK that again. That'll help us to identify all of those particular areas. The other way that we can identify this without having the shading on the chart is just by looking at this control line here. There is an input for this particular component, which as we open it up, we'll just go through some of the simpler things to start with. And we'll say display background coloring false. What that does is it basically applies the original Bollinger Band value, but the change display component will show up only with a coloured central control line here. And so that will show up anywhere where price is expanding or not contracting. Now we'll reset this back to the hourly and we will add, only because it's my personal preference, we'll add on the background change display. And for the sake of easy eyeball, we're going to change these expanding percents back to 0 so that we have a continuous either expanding or contracting field on every single bar that we're printing. And so there we go. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've got a feature here with this continuation indicator, which we've dropped on in order to be able to identify some possible trade entries and different trends. And the reason for that is for those of you who have watched the continuation or Icarus Signals continuation indicator video, you will have noticed that within the continuation indicator, there is a BolliBand change display input. Now that's self-generating, which allows the continuation indicator to appear based on the BolliBand conditions. Now, having said that, you can't actually apply the BolliBand change display indicator from the continuation indicator. But if you prefer just to use the standard Bollinger inbuilt and then overlay the continuation indicator without having that particular visual indication from the Icarus indicator, then by all means you're more than free to go and do that. The continuation indicator has it inbuilt. The code's actually inbuilt into that particular indicator for the benefit of the user. So we're just going to open up this here and we'll show you the correlation between these two particular indicators. You'll notice here that we've got the Icarus continuation indicator loaded up. We're going to go and edit that. In this particular instance, we've got that being generated with a 50 period EMA and the slope intensity thresholds. That's the sensitivity of 0.1. We're going to have it populate the chart with an indicator on the very first signal that appears. Those of you who have watched the continuation indicator will have a little bit more background as to how that works. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to quickly flip back there and have a bit of a look. We'll turn, for the sake of this exercise, off the preemptive mode. That will just mean that when we are looking at the most current bar, if it's going to likely close within 80% of the bar being complete as a signal, it will start to print or to flicker on and off, letting the user know that they can start setting up any of their particular trade entries based on the fact that that bar will indeed end up printing as a valid signal depending on the settings that they're using. But we'll turn that off just for the sake of the exercise. And we'll scroll down further here to match up the values that we've got. Now, for those of you that would have seen before, we've got all the same settings here, which we've pre-arranged that match each of the settings of this separate Bollinger Band or BolliBand change display indicator here, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, what we'll do is we'll just quickly select this here. Now, you'll notice that mode 2 for the continuation signal uses the BolliBand filter so that it does not print any indicators or any signals generated by the continuation indicator which occur outside of the allowable environment. Now, the allowable environment for that particular continuation signal means that only when the BolliBand change displays indicate an expansion of the bands and therefore a stronger trend will the continuation indicator fire off and print itself a little marker there. So we're going to change this to false. It's currently set to true, and we'll notice that the chart will then populate quite a few more of these continuation signals in areas where the BolliBand change display is suggesting we're heading into a period of contraction. This helps us clear out a lot of the noise and it helps us to ensure that the probability of our entries or signals, depending on how the way our strategies have been built, have a higher probability of success. So we'll load that up, and we can see here and here, although we have quite a decent run, they appear much more commonly because we're allowing them to appear in areas where there is a little bit of an unknown direction relative to these particular circumstances. So that's one there. We can see that they start to show up here early before the conditions change. For those of you that have seen the reversals indicator, you'll notice that it's also mentioned in the continuation indicator video that with the appearance of the continuation indicators, they often will appear in areas like this where we have a fairly rapid price move down, but the signals continue to appear at the point at which price then reverses and heads the other way. Now this is where our Icarus reversals indicator becomes very, very useful. I'm just going to drop this on here. We're going to load up the standard setting for reversals, which we've got preset in our settings here. Preemptive mode's also turned off, and contraction is not required. Again, the reversals indicator talks to the BolliBand Change Display indicator, and it will also adjust its appearance based on the environment, which in this particular case of the reversals can be turned on and off for contraction of the BolliBands being required. Therefore, price is beginning to compress. We believe, based on probabilities, that any strong trend is slowly coming to an end and is likely to reverse, and therefore we wait for the Icarus reversals indicator to appear as a further confirmation that we've got what it is we need to see. So we can see here that as we start to extend down into a point where price reverses, we've got our continuation indicators here, and we've marked them in this case with arrows and the ATR band blocks, but we see they start to appear very shortly thereafter. So that would then invalidate these continuations here, and we would then start to see clearance of the reversals indicator and up in the opposite direction. So again, this helps to filter out some of the noise when we've got our continuation indicators appearing in areas that we might not otherwise take them. So we'll see here, we've got entries at this particular point all the way up to this particular point where we've got an inverse signal within a contracting field. So depending on how you apply these and which timeframes you apply them to, we can see here very, very strong trend up on the day. We've got a reversal indicator here which doesn't clear the bottom of the band, so therefore it would be ignored. But in situations like this where we've got some fairly volatile moves both up and down, in this case, sort of north of 600 pips thereabouts, swinging sort of 2 and 3 directions, that reversals indicator really helps us get a little bit of a clearer picture as to which of the continuation signals and the environments in which they're appearing based on the BolliBand Change Display are going to work best. But in this case, we'll remove this one to clean it up, and we'll just scoot back to a much, much shorter time frame. We'll go now to the 15-minute. We'll scoot you out here, and again, the shorter time frames, as many sort of more experienced traders will know, will tend to have a lot of change between the particular directions because price can't quite figure out what it is that it's trying to do. And that's why we have fully optimizable inputs here where we can extend the period and in fact technically change the period in which we are applying the BolliBand Change Display by modifying some of these numbers. It's a fairly crude exercise, but it'll give us the ability to effectively apply an hourly or a daily BolliBand setting onto a 15-minute chart. You can obviously run 2 separate charts, and the NinjaTrader 8 versions of those allow you to run 2 of those charts concurrently. So you've got a daily Bollinger Band overlay onto a shorter time frame. But if we then just go and put in 5% for expansion and 5% for contraction, and give us that little feedback there, we'll see here, even on the 5-minute, we start to have the appearance of signals in the expansion. That would give us an indication of a long trade. And then I expect that after sort of, in this case, 100 pips or so, we would probably see, we can try one now, drop in a reversal indicator and see, we'll just use the standard setting where they are. They've shown up here and not at the top there where we might expect them to otherwise. It hasn't been optimized. So what we'll do is we'll open this up, edit it, and load up the pre-settings and see if it's going to give us. And here we have that here. So we can see then that the reversal indicators after this big run up, all of these failed indicators here haven't closed below the bands. The bands are set fairly large, and it gives us these indicators up here. So again, looking at the expansion environments, which are fairly tight with this particular arrangement, we'll take these reversal indicators off because they haven't been set, so it's easy to eyeball. And we can see again here, signals start to show up in a period of expansion. We might even bring that back a little bit, and we'll say that we don't want 5% expansion, we'll accept 1%. That'll broaden out the area where we want to see enough of an expansion for it to give us some acceptance. And we start to see them appear here all the way down to this particular point, which is 105 pips in that particular regard. So you can see how on the shorter time frames it works quite well. There's another environment here where we've got expansion coming up for another fairly significant run. Our different settings will help to clear out some of this noise, but again, there's a number of other signals and indicators which we can drop in as overlays here, including the auto support and resistance, the Icarus oscillator levels, which are in some of the other later videos, which will give us a much better understanding as to how we can filter out some of these and really take the most high probability trades. There's another few examples here of the continuation indicator being supported for again another 100 pips or so by the Bolli change display. We'll go back to our 1 hour. That's a more appropriate time frame. And just give everyone a little bit of a chance to have a look at those. We can even go out to weekly. I haven't actually set anything up here, but again, we can see some fairly significant price action here for sort of almost 2,700 pips in this particular point back in 2014. The settings here will have picked up this very strong move on continuation again for another 15,000 pips in that regard. And it's just started here again, actually, in this most recent period with the recovery after the little COVID hiccup. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of an understanding as to the value of the BolliBand Change Display indicator, and more importantly, its application with predominantly the Icarus continuation indicator, but also how the reversals indicator also interacts with the inbuilt BolliBand Change Display code within those individual indicators, so you can benefit from the filtering tool without having to actually use it on your chart. So what we'll do as well, just to give everyone a little bit of an understanding as to when we build our strategies using these particular rules. Now, again, there's a range of different entry and exits in environmental or market condition filters that we use. We've printed out some of the backtest results using a few different instruments. I think that they are set for 1 hour, using the continuation signal appearing in different Bollinger Band or BolliBand change display environments. And we'll have a look at some of the equity curves that have been produced for the back tests. Now, we'll start with this one here. So this is the pound yen since 2008. You'll notice here that we've used in this particular first test every tick, which for those of you who are familiar with the backtesting process is really the most reliable way. We want to see a value of 90 here on our backtesting results. Most of the Icarus signal strategies we can test using open prices only. The code will allow us to do much more quick, more concise backtesting, which gives us a little bit of a direction as to what we can achieve with different code settings. And then once they're proven out, we then go and run them through the every tick, which takes up a lot more sort of computing power, a lot more time. But for the sake of this exercise, we've outlined some of the results for different pairs. And just some of the very slight tweaks between the same strategy, the same code, using the continuation strategy with a range of different BolliBand change display overlays and some different entry and exit rules, and how we can then produce a combined equity curve, which is very, very reliable and not too volatile. So we'll just zoom in a little bit here. We can see that there was sort of almost 800, almost 900 trades here, and a fairly solid left to right equity curve. Now, keep in mind that this particular backtest uses a fixed lot strategy rather than a percent of account, which you can adjust again as you see fit based on your particular risk profile. we'll scroll across here to the actual results. 1.36 profit factor is fairly reasonable for the FX pairs. You'll find that sort of anything over 1.3, even 1.2, if it's not a standalone strategy, is fairly reasonable. We'll notice here that short positions won 65%, long positions won 62%. So our percentage of profitable trades in this particular instance was 63, almost 64%, and our average profit is slightly lower than the average loss, but the number of those helps us to ensure that we have a positive equity curve. So that's the pound yen, and this is the same pound yen, although using a factor ratio rather than a set amount of pips for the different settings. So when we've built this particular strategy using the continuation, we set the same parameters for continuation values. So the EMA might be, for example, a 50 EMA with a threshold of 0.1 or 0.08, depending on what the settings might be. We'll apply that over a fairly long period because we want the biggest possible data set with the largest amount of different market environments as possible. But we have within our particular code the option to be able to toggle between setting our parameters, our entries, our exits, our thresholds between pips or a factor, with the factor being measured as an ATR or multiple of ATR. So this is the exact same instrument over the exact same periods, producing in this case around about 650 or 700 trades thereabouts. So again, a fairly solid equity curve from left to right. This has ended up with a larger dollar value, which we don't worry too much about in respect of these back tests, because it's all about the shape of the equity curve and the risk profile of achieving that. And as we scroll across here again, we've got a much better profit factor of 1.54. Those with a more keen eye will notice that our modelling quality here is marked as NA, which is typically not something you would rely upon in total, but we know that when we run these not control points, but open prices only, as you'll see marked up here, we can then go and roll the same code into the every tick. It'll take a much longer time to backtest, considering particularly we go from sort of 2008 onwards, and it gives us a very good result. We then scroll down to another instrument altogether, something of a very different risk profile, which is the Aussie dollar. Now this again produces around about 650 trades using precisely the same settings as the pound yen here. So we don't change anything except for the instrument. And then this will then produce us with, again, another profit factor, very, very healthy at 1.68, with average profits at sort of 108 thereabouts versus sort of 79 or 80, and also a percentage of trades being sort of suitably above 50 at 55 there. So if you can imagine, we combine this equity curve, which is very, very strong for the first half of the period and then sort of starts to flatten off but doesn't really draw down very hard. And we then combine that with this equity curve and this equity curve, we get a very strong, stable left to right appearance of the equity curve. Now you can actually basket test these strategies, or we basket test these strategies with the NinjaTrader 8 platform. That gives us the opportunity, unlike MT4, to be able to bundle together a number of different instruments and trade those concurrently. So it gives you a much better idea of being able to manage that particular risk or the risk profile of a particular strategy, so that you're not curve fitting strategies or settings to particular instruments, which is all too common. So hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of an understanding here. We've gone back to the continuation indicators appearing on the BolliBand Change Display. Again, all of the inputs and parameters within all of the Icarus signals indicators are all fully optimizable. So you can really build those to best suit your particular trading style, how you appear, how you prefer your charts to appear, and the way that you want to build your strategies. So again, we've got our colors are all modifiable as we went through earlier. And we think that you'll find the application of this BolliBand Change Display, as opposed to a standard Bollinger Band, is going to give users a much better visual indication of when price is expanding, or I should say the bands are expanding or contracting to a particular degree, which helps us then identify much more high probability overlays for indicators or entries, which in this case are identified with the continuation signal, and they're equally effective with the reversal signal and some of the signals generated by the Icarus oscillator and a couple of others, which are included in some videos further down the track. So hopefully that's been of use to everyone. Again, we have got the Think4X demo account using here. We also suggest that people obviously do their own research on what particular broker would suit them best, although AxiTrader and Think4X are two that we use for operation of our automated strategies and manual strategies. But again, feel free to shoot us an email or drop us a note via the website, or subscribe to the channel where there'll be more videos and different entries and exits and trade setups that we record as they become available. And of course, jump onto the MQL5 community, or indeed the marketplace of the Icarus Signals website. Get yourself the opportunity to have a look at the free trial of all of the different indicators, or some of the different leasing or full license key purchases for these indicators, and also then combinations that we find work very well together. I hope that has been of interest to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at the next video.